Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Well, hello there. This is Zoe Routh. I'm your friendly neighborhood Australian-Canadian leadership expert. I like to think of myself as an intrepid explorer of the leadership landscape. I'm essentially a team navigator. I get you and your team set for expedition and show you how you can navigate the wilderness of your particular leadership wilderness ahead. Because leadership is a bit like that. It's scary, it's unknown, but you can learn to read the maps and navigate your way safely and have a good time doing it. So that's what I do. I help teams and leaders with their strategy and culture so they can get to where they're wanting to go faster and easier with way more fun. So my question for you today is, are you a leader and do you know what you're doing? I know it sounds a little bit silly because I know you're a leader and I know you know what you are doing. Do you want to do it better? My conversation today is with Mick Spiers. He is a lovely gentleman. I love this conversation. He is an Australian living in the Philippines who is likely coming back to Australia. He is the founder of the Leadership Project and has recently published a book called You're a Leader, Now What? Which is fantastic. And it's all about purpose-driven action in teams. So we have quite a deep conversation about Mick's leadership journey, particularly around urban mobility, which is basically getting people and traffic to move better in cities so the commute isn't so nasty, and all the leadership challenges associated with that particular issue. And then we talked a lot about his leadership philosophy and how he can go about solving some of the challenges that teams and leaders are facing right now, including the Great Resignation, the Great Reset, recruitment and staffing, etc. So really broad brush conversation moving ahead quite quickly. So without further ado, it's on with the show. Well, all the way from the Philippines, welcome to the show, Mick Spiers.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to a really interesting conversation with you and today, and I hope that your audience get great benefit from it.
I always hope that too. And one of the first things I love to find out from guests is, how did you get to where you are right now? Because we were just chatting before I hit record, and we were talking about where you're living, which is currently the Philippines, but you've lived in Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, all over the place. So what is the journey that you've been on to get to where you are now?
Oh, wow, that's a really long story, but I'll try and make it as abridged as I can. So as a young man, I joined the Army in Australia, and that was my first foray into leadership. I learnt a lot during that time. Not my thing these days. I've turned into an extreme pacifist, if you like, but at the time it was the right thing for me, and certainly no regrets.
Okay, just pause for a second because There's a lot to unpack in just what you just said there. So you learned a lot in the Army, but not your thing anymore. What were the things that you've taken away from your Army experience? How long were you in the Army and what did you take?
Yes, I was in the Army for 8 years, and then I was in the Department of Defence in Canberra, where you are, Zoe, for 5 years as well. And what I took from that is there was a lot around instinctive obedience and a few things like that. So I learnt some poor things about culture. I learnt some negative things along the way, but I also could pick those leaders, even in that military kind of institutional kind of environment, the ones that really took due care of their people were the ones that were great leaders. So ones that could paint a vision, could understand with deep clarity as why we were doing something, and didn't just go, well, we're doing this because we were told to do it, but really knew why we were doing things and took that time to truly take care of the people in their charge. Not to behave like they're in charge, but to take care of the people in their charge are the ones that are always respected and admired. So I took lots of great negative and positive lessons from my military experience. So 15 years, or was more than that in the end, but let's say 15 years in defence aerospace, because when I was in the Army, I was in aerospace. I worked on helicopters and went up in different trade instructor roles and leadership roles whilst I was in the military. When I went to Defence, I ended up being the Director of Systems Engineering for what's called the Defence Material Organisation. So lots of different public service leadership roles. And then I branched out and went out into the commercial world. In the commercial world, I joined a company that was building flight simulators, a company called Thales. It was very exciting. It really had a great time there. Building flight simulators is a lot of fun, Zoe. You get to kind of test it and almost learn how to fly, really, even as a technician working on flight simulators. And the company I was working with then had a new division that they created called Transport. And I'd never heard of it before, but I got the tap on the shoulder to go across into this big world of urban mobility and public transport. And my eyes lit up at that point because I started to have purpose and meaning in what I was doing. So in this world of urban mobility, I had a vision of a world where people could travel seamlessly around their cities without delays, without congestion, and ultimately without stress. And I spent my next 15 years working in that space, and I had this clarity of purpose around what I was trying to create. And then it dawned on me one day, Zoe, it was this huge revelation that I was spending all this time trying to de-stress the way people commuted to and from work. But then the real stressful part was the part in the four walls. So I was reading research from organisations like the Association for Talent Development and Gallup, and they were all saying that, ranges of 16% to 20% of people in the world truly love their job and like their boss.
It's sad, isn't it?
That's really sad, right? So we're spending up to 1/3 of our lives in these workspaces that either don't inspire us or, worse still, completely stress us out. So this knocked on a whole chain of events where I realised that working on de-stressing someone's commute to and from work was only going to solve part of the problem. And I needed to focus my efforts on this place where people were spending up to 1/3 of their life to make it a better existence. And that's why I started the Leadership Project. It started as a podcast just to get the conversations going, to get thought leaders from all around the world to work out, where did we go wrong? How did we go so wrong that so few people are really fully engaged at the workplace? So that was the podcast. That led me to taking on coaching certifications because I wanted to do more. So I've been through multiple levels of coaching certification now. It led me to write my first book, which is called You're a Leader, Now What?, which is all about the very first transition into leadership. And now, as of January this year, I created the Leadership Project's Leadership Academy to really flip traditional leadership development on its head and to make it more impactful and applicable, to get it to a stage where people are actually applying what they're learning about leadership. So that's actually probably the shortest version. It probably seemed long, but that's the shortest version of my career I've ever given, I think, Zoe. So that's it.
Oh, well done. Well done on brevity and being succinct. Okay, so I have a couple questions that have come out of your biographical soliloquy. And the first question is kind of a technical one back to in Singapore. How do we de-stress somebody's commute? What were the actual technical solutions to that? How did you actually propose that we do that?
Oh, and it's unfinished business. And I'm sitting here in the Philippines. I can tell you in Manila, we're a long way from that vision being achieved. Some cities are better than others. Singapore, quite an amazing city. I lived in Hong Kong for 3 years, an amazing city when it comes to mobility and how you move around. But they're also a little bit blessed. They've got a high population density in a relatively low geographic footprint. So it makes it more cost effective to build a public transit network that covers where everyone works and where everyone lives. So the answer to this, and it's not an easy one, but the answer to this is actually what we call mobility as a service. A lot of people are trying to build their way out of this. The cities are trying to build more and more infrastructure, thinking that that's the way to get out of this. We actually have plenty of infrastructure. What we don't have is an intelligent use of that infrastructure. So I'm going to give Sydney as an example here. You're living in Canberra, so I'm going to make an assumption that you go to Sydney on a regular basis.
Not that regular. Try to avoid it.
There's probably a reason for that, right? So in Sydney, the average vehicle occupancy is 1.3 people per car for a private vehicle. So when you see a sea of traffic, you're not seeing a sea of people. you're seeing a sea of metal and huge chunks of metal that take up huge amounts of space, and we're not using our infrastructure effectively. So the answer to the urban mobility problem is to start using the right mode for each leg of someone's journey, to convince someone to do things like take an Uber from their home to the nearest railway station, take the train for the bulk of their journey, and then maybe get onto a scooter for the last leg of their journey. So you're using the optimal bit of the infrastructure for each part of the journey. Now, the reason why I say it's not easy, commercial interest gets in the road. So we're talking about organisations that have got commercial interests, that Uber want to maximise their yield, the scooter company wants to maximise their yield. We've got the personal pride of having your own car and all of this. There's all reasons why it's hard to do, but that's what we need to do. We need to get people out of their private cars, and we need them to use infrastructure in a more intelligent way.
So it sounds like an adaptive challenge more than a technical challenge. And that's the reason why I asked the question, is it simply an infrastructure thing? We don't have enough buses, et cetera. But no, you've answered that question. Yes, we have more than enough infrastructure and resources. The adaptive challenge is, how do we get people to change their way of thinking? And some of it's the commercial agenda, I think. And then just off the cuff of my head, I'm thinking about, well, why is it that people want to have their own cars? It's one of the things you mentioned was the pride of ownership. The other one is convenience of being autonomous and independent. And I think that's probably I'm guessing, is one of the reasons why there is less an uptake of public service transportation in many different cities, is because people like the convenience of just being able to walk out their door. I think and I'm curious about your opinion about this too, like with the rise, hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers for this, of autonomous self-driving cars, the idea of optimizing usage of resources is there. And I thought, well, this is the same problem we've had with public transport. It's not a different problem. It's the same problem. Like, there's going to be resources available driving around to optimize use of them. But people are still going to want to have their own thing and to be independent off the grid. So in the work that you did around this, did you tackle some of those beliefs and values that people had? How did you go about doing that, if you did?
Yeah, so it comes down to culture at that point and societal expectations. So there is an element of freedom associated with this, and everyone wants some kind of freedom of choice. They want to feel like they're in control, that they want to feel like they're holding the steering wheel of their own life and literally controlling what they do and all of those convenience factors. And when you think about the forefathers of the automotive industry, that's the dream that they had. They had this dream of personal freedom. But is it really personal freedom to get in that car and I'm going to sit behind that steering wheel and I'm going to sit in traffic just like everyone else? You're not actually moving anywhere. How's that freedom? It's actually become the opposite of freedom. You're in this steel can where you're now trapped and you can't move anywhere. So yes, there is an element of freedom there. But if we can open people's eyes and see that, well, if you used it more efficiently, you wouldn't be stuck in traffic. You would actually be getting to work on time without worrying about whether it's going to take you 40 minutes to get to work or more than 4 hours. At the end of the day, you'd be getting home earlier and spending more time with your family. So if we can break the mindset, then we can get there. The other challenge with the mindset is, unfortunately, in many cities, not every city, but in many cities, there's a stigma that if you catch the bus, it's because you're poor or you couldn't afford it. But catching the bus is a freedom. You can read a book, you can listen to a podcast, you can do all kinds of things when you're on that bus or you're on that train. But people are struggling with that mindset shift, and we need to keep on working on it. Now, why I say it's a cultural thing is, and this could be one of our things that we talk about leadership in general, Zoe, is that you get the behaviour that you reward, that you celebrate and you tolerate. So if we can incentivize people to sell that car. Cars are not a wise investment. They're probably the only investment that we spend a large chunk of our money on, and it immediately depreciates as soon as you leave the showroom floor. You spend all this money on a car and you only use it for about 4% of your life. The rest of the time it's parked somewhere. And parking it creates its own challenge as well, by the way. So we're spending all this money on this asset that we're not really utilising properly. So if we can incentivize people, we can reward and celebrate the right behaviours, then we can get that mindset shift. And the autonomous vehicles is an interesting one where it's still some work to do here. But with that autonomous vehicle, you can start thinking about having shorter shuttles that go around suburbs, picking people up and taking them to that railway station, for example. An autonomous vehicle is also possible to do what we call platooning, where you might get 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cars all bumper to bumper behind each other, which a human driver could not do because of the braking and the reaction times and all this kind of stuff. But connected autonomous vehicles can platoon behind each other, and all of a sudden you're maximising the use of the space. So it's through intelligent technology and a mindset shift that we can actually get our cities moving again.
Yeah. And it's quite complex because it's not just one aspect of the culture that you need to reward and promote. It's because the other, as soon as we start to unpack and look at this layer of beliefs and values around why people do what they do when it comes to transportation, we also come up with things like status symbols and fear of the other. And I think the pandemic has accelerated this fear of being around other people in public as well. So there's reluctance to get into small confined spaces with strangers. It's actually quite an enormous change issue. I mean, the technical solution is pretty straightforward. Yeah, let's get into autonomous driving vehicles and maximize our resources, and it all runs smoothly. And then the resistance to that is the trickier part to it. So this is really great fodder for the conversation around what kind of leadership do we need. And you mentioned before we click record that you've got some very clear, ambitious goals for growing leadership. And I want to start, first of all, with your leadership philosophy. So having lived and worked around in different organizations and around the world and seeing what works and what doesn't work and learn from those lessons, what has crystallized into your beliefs, your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, and it comes to a fore a lot recently, Zoe, this question, because of the great resignation or the great realization, the great protest, whatever you want to call it. People are waking up and realizing that the workplaces that we've been in have not been really what we're looking for. At the heart of it starts human needs, the needs for survival, the need for love and belonging, the need for power, the need to feel like we matter, the need for fun, the need for freedom of choice and freedom from oppression. So it starts with fundamental human needs, but then it converts in, well, how do you create that in the workplace? So what our mission is at the Leadership Project is to give leaders all of the tools and the skills that they need to create amazing teams and amazing workspaces. And those amazing workspaces for us are ones where everyone has purpose and meaning in what they do. That every single person that turns up knows what they're doing and how it relates to some ultimate goal that makes the world a better place. So everyone has purpose and meaning in what they do. That everyone has a voice and that voice is heard. That their opinions are valued and that they feel like their boss actually takes the moment, takes the time with them to listen to their opinions, because everyone has an opinion on how a business could be done better or how an organisation could be improved. And ultimately that everyone is treated like they individually or collectively matter. And when you create that kind of environment, that's when you're going to create an environment where everyone knocks it out of the park, where you're able to help them to see what their individual superpowers are, to give them the environment where they can flourish and feel that what they do is important, and then let them get on with it. Let them get on with it. And where the freedom of choice comes in is to understand that people don't like being told what to do. They don't want a boss that just sits them in a chair and goes, right, today you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this and here is your deadline and I need it done this way. We're paying these people a lot of money, Zoe, for their intellectual capacity. So let them make some choices. And when they make choices about what they're doing, they take extreme ownership. And you know yourself, if you are the one that came up with the idea of what you're going to do today, you're going to do a much better job of that than someone saying, I need this done and I need it done by 12 o'clock. So ultimately, my leadership philosophy comes down to understanding human needs, to give them a safe environment where they can flourish, and then to inspire them into meaningful action around a worthy cause. Not telling them what to do, but inspiring them into action around a worthy cause.
All this is heart-centered leadership, and I fully endorse everything you've said. And Mick, I want to get your take on a situation. So let's apply those principles to a real-life workplace that I'm working with. It's a professional services firm, and they are struggling with recruitment like pretty much every single sector. The great resignation or realization, whatever you want to call it, has meant that there's fewer people around for more jobs, which means that it's an employees market and it's really hard to recruit and keep good people. And a lot of industries and businesses like the professional services firm I'm talking about are struggling to actually get people in the door and to take on the workload that they have, which the knock-on effect is there is a crushing amount of workload for the people left behind. So the leaders that I'm working with are doing all the right things, as you said, purpose-driven, clear goals and ambitions towards how we're making the world a better place, offering the employees autonomy and responsibility to move and use their intellectual grist to make a difference. All that stuff is true. And they even gave them more money, gave them a significant pay increase. And yet, the CEO was telling me there is still this sense of begrudging sense of entitlement from these people. And she was saying, what do I have to do? Like, we've done everything possible to set the thing up right, to set the culture right. There is the lack of resources, lack of human resources to deliver on it. And they try to compensate that with the pay rise. So what are they doing right and what are they doing wrong? What else could they do in order to help get beyond this particular challenge? Is it simply just a resourcing thing?
Yeah, wonderful question. So there's a few things that let's start with what they're doing right. So they're giving purpose and meaning. They're giving a level of autonomy. These are some wonderful things. To create an environment where everyone is really knocking it out of the park, we need to empower people, and it sounds like there's a lot of that. We also need to enable people. And enabling could be two sides of a story. It could be around resources, not having enough resources at all, or not empowering people to say no. Not empowering people to say no. So if you can empower people that they can say no to certain things, then they can self-manage their workload a little bit more and they won't get so stressed out. They can start filtering and going, well, of the 20 things today that I could be doing, the top 3 are these. And if you just focus on 3 things every day, you can be really proud going home at the end of the day going, I achieved 3 major things. But if you try to do 20 things at the same time, you're going to go home frustrated that you didn't finish any one of them. So in that, yes, you need to look at the resources. Do they have enough resources? Have you enabled them? It's one thing to empower them and say, all right, off you go. You're empowered. You're autonomous. Go and do this thing. But don't come and ask me for resources. That can be a problem. And the next balance of the resourcing thing is empower them to say no and empower them to prioritize, so that they stop trying to do 20 things and they only do 3 things at a time, and they do those 3 things extraordinarily well. Through to the point where they might even time block and go, I'm only going to work on this project this morning, nothing else. Do not disturb me with anything else so I can actually complete this thing. And people get great pride at the end of the day, Zoe, when they go home going, you know what? I set myself a goal of doing today and I did it. I did all 3. It's very frustrating to go to work and have a to-do list with 16, 20, 30 things on it and go home and have done none of them. So I would say, yes, make sure they've got enough resources, but I'd also say make sure that they've got the ability to push back and say no to some things that maybe are inefficient or not as important as other things on their list.
I think they do have the power to say no to inefficient, unimportant things. I think the context is beyond the borders of their organization, though. It's also the pressure from the system dynamic between them and their clients. So their clients have particular needs and deadlines and parameters that they need to fill. And the professional services firm needs to meet them where they are, and which puts a downward pressure or backward pressure back on the staff. And so it's all well and good to say you are empowered to say no or enabled to say no. You just can't say no to your clients, which is the source of the challenge or the compounding effect of the challenge. Is the clients have all these needs. They don't have enough people to meet those needs. And so it comes back to the individual, I think. I think we've just systemically diagnosed the issue just right there. And so it becomes a little bit of a rock and a hard place at the moment for these guys, I think, is they need more people. They can't get more people. The client won't change. They haven't asked the client to change, and the client's operating in an ecosystem where they cannot change. And so it seems a little bit doomed in some regard. Have you got any brilliant insights to how to fix that, Mick?
Definitely look at the resourcing for sure. It sounds like everything else has been looked at. So definitely look at the resourcing. I would say then bring, and this is a nervous conversation. I can imagine executives shuddering at this idea, but bring the customer into that conversation and go, right, we've only got so much capacity to deal with right now. Of the 30 things on our list, which are the most important 3? Which are the ones that will really move the needle for you? So bring the client into that conversation. Yes, it'll be uncomfortable, but won't everyone be better off once you've had that conversation? And at the end, the client might turn around and go, yeah, well, it's more than 3. I've got 7. And these are the 7 highest priorities. And if you can't resource it, then we've got a problem. But at least now you know with some level of clarity what the client's priorities are. So I'd bring the client into it. Yeah.
That's a great recommendation. And I think the timing is actually ripe because so many sectors are struggling with the same issue, with the recruitment issue and supply chain issues. And so it's not just a one-off unique to that particular organization. It's across the board. So there ought to be some empathy there. And it's a recommendation I've made previously to other sectors and other leaders. It's like, yeah, if we can't get the people to fill the roles and continuing as in business as usual, we need to change the business as usual and change expectations with our customers and our suppliers about what we actually can do given this new context. I mean, if you look at like one of the big things, a bunch of people died during the pandemic. That's a lot of resources, humans that are no longer around to help drive the economy and support services, etc. A lot of people are still getting sick all the time with the flu here in Australia and COVID. So that's knocking people off the roster as well. And then there's the lack of immigration. So all this is compounding into lack of mobilized workforce. So this is another great systemic question that we were addressing. First, we were looking at the systemic issues around transportation in cities, and now we're looking at service provision. Big questions. Leadership project. I wanted to ask about that. And you mentioned in your bio, your story, I think, that you've implemented the Leadership Academy and the Leadership Project, looking at how people learn and the different way of learning, and you really want to engage people in a different way. So tell us about that. What is the Leadership Academy doing differently when it comes to leadership training?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Zoe. And I'm really proud to say that we've won an award with what I'm about to say. So it's been recognised as an innovation in adult education. To me, it was a little bit of a no-brainer, but it's getting recognised and people are noticing the difference of this. Now, having the career I've had, I've been on countless numbers of leadership development programs, and some of them have been amazing. So I'm not here to rubbish them, but there's parts of them that are not as effective as they could be. At the extreme end, the very poor programs are teaching outdated thinking that hasn't been updated to a modern world, but also using outdated methods. So in my time, I would countless times be sent on a 5-day leadership retreat, and I'd have a wonderful time with all of my friends and cohort and all this kind of stuff. And we'd drink from a fire hose for 5 days. We'd drink wine at night usually, have a wonderful shared experience. And there's a big benefit in that shared experience, by the way. So I'm not rubbishing the whole thing. But you go on this 5-day leadership retreat and you go back to work on the Monday afterwards and exactly nothing would change. Nothing. So you've got all this new knowledge, but you don't know how to put it into action. So what we've done in our academy, in the way that we structure our programs, is we embrace the science of how people learn. We use collaborative and social learning. We use experiential learning. We're getting people to talk and reflect and share their own experiences in their cohort, where they open up and really talk about the content and what it means to them and what's emerging for them, not just talking at them and trying to teach them, but trying to get a transformative effect, almost like a coaching effect in the training environment where they discover the leader that's within them. So collaborative and social learning. The next one is micro-learning. we only teach one concept at a time. One. We go deep into that concept, but we teach one concept at a time. And then they immediately go and apply it. And the third one is we use gamification. So we make it a bit fun. We make it a bit of a competition. We use a bit of gamification to make it impactful. But if I could say the thing that's most innovative in it is this micro-learning approach. Our flagship program is 8 weeks long. And on the Monday, we'll have what's called a learning lab. And the learning lab is a bit of knowledge transfer. There's a lot of that discussion going on. We use a lot of emotion to make sure that the learning sticks. It's not just facts. It's a bit of emotion in there as well. But then when they leave the learning lab, they go and immediately apply the principle that they've just learnt. And then the next session they come back to is what's called practical lab. And when they arrive at practical lab, they share with their cohort all of the things that they've just learnt about themselves and learnt about others. So to break it down, the principle is learning, action, reflection. So they learn a new concept, they immediately apply it, and then they reflect on what worked for them, what didn't work, what would they do differently next time, and they become richer. And then in the next module, we go to the next principle. It's almost like habit building. The science of habit building tells us that we need to practice a habit. Some people say it's the average is 66 days, I think, but you need to practice a habit for 14 days or whatever before it actually starts to stick. And don't try and change 10 habits at a time. So I teach one principle at a time, immediately apply it, and then reflect on it.
I love it. And I run a leadership development program as well called Amplifiers. And I know that I am guilty of way too many concepts in any of our leadership gatherings. I'm like, I love content and I love new ideas. And it's sort of, that's where that's coming from, but it's not necessarily always helpful. And the fact that you've got an experiential model embedded into the microlearning, the learn, do, review, learn, practical, and reflection, makes me very excited. So my background is in outdoor experiential education, where learn, do, review was, or plan, do, review was essential experiential learning cycle was embedded into everything we did too. That's fantastic. So your methodology is obviously working. So, and I think you're right. Like, I think that's the context in which we find ourselves as well. Like, people don't have a lot of RAM left or brainwave space left to digest massive, complex sequences of content. They need to just break it down into little chunks that they can learn, apply, and see how it worked. I think that's brilliant. So can you give us an example of one of those like principles that you would teach? I'm just curious now about the topics.
Yeah, I'd like to give two examples. So Module 2 is about learning with purpose and meaning. And I'm bringing that one up because we've already discussed it a little bit. So in the learning lab, we go through why purpose is important, why people are seeking purpose and meaning. We look at things like organisational purpose and purpose alignment and what happens when there's an incongruence with purpose. So teach a lot of principles, discuss a lot of principles around purpose, even talk about things like purpose anxiety, because some people get really, they're seeking purpose and they don't know how to get there. So we teach a lot of techniques about how someone can discover their own purpose. But then immediately as they leave the learning lab and they're energized and ready to go and take on the world, they build their own ikigai. They build their own purpose statement. They write out their values and beliefs, and they write their own leadership credo. And then they pull the team together, their own team, and they share it with them. Here is my ikigai. Here is my purpose statement. These are my values and beliefs that I will hold strong to. Here is my leadership credo. As a leader, I will always. As a leader, I will. And they finish all these statements. And they pull their team together and they share it with them. And then they come to the practical lab and they've learnt so much about themselves through physically doing these things, not learning about them, physically doing these things. And they come to the learning lab and they're all really excited, going, oh, I can't believe how much my team appreciated my openness and my vulnerability to share with them my purpose and my values and beliefs and my leadership credo. They're really excited about it. The second example I'm going to give is a very concrete one, as the best way I could describe it. I'm sure you've heard of Liz Wiseman, the author of Multipliers, right? Huge fan. And she has this concept called the extreme question experiment. And then in the extreme question experiment, a leader will go an entire day or at least one meeting where they ask nothing but questions. So instead of going into the meeting and go, right team, our priorities for this week are, and Zoe, I need you to do this. The leader will go into the meeting and go, right, all right team, what do you think our biggest priorities are this week? And what makes those important? And what will be the positive impact if we're able to achieve that by the end of the week? So they do nothing but ask questions. So I teach that principle. Thank you, Liz. Huge fan. And then they go and do it. They leave the learning lab, and the next day they go and practice it. They go into their next meeting in the right mindset, and they do nothing but ask questions. They come back to the practical lab, and same thing happens again. They're like, you got no idea how their faces light up when they share with the rest of the group. I did it. I did the extreme question experiment. And you know what? My team are amazing. They had all of the answers. I didn't have to tell them what to do. They already knew. And now because it's coming out of their mouth, they took on extreme ownership, and they felt like their voice was heard and their opinion was valued, and they felt like they mattered. So it's that learn, immediately apply, reflect, and in this case, celebrate. Because you're seeing immediate improvements in the engagement with the team.
That's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, I love that book, Multipliers by Liz. I had her on the podcast as well. So
cool.
We might link to that in the show notes as well. So holacracy is the theme for this quarter on the show. And holacracy has been an interesting concept that we've been exploring in terms of flat hierarchy in organizations, building autonomous teams. What do you think about it? Like, does it resonate with you? Have you come across it? Have you implemented anything similar?
Yeah, it really does resonate with me as long as it takes in some of those human needs, right? So that ability, that things like love and belonging, the understanding of power dynamics, all of these things, I really think that there's something in it. And what I love about it is that it's going to allow an environment where people bring their superpowers to the table and they don't care so much about their kryptonite. They're open about their kryptonite and they say, okay, yeah, I've got my weaknesses, but that's okay because I've got other people around me that complement those weaknesses. And what I think it requires is that environment where people can bring their authentic self and bring their own strengths to the table. It's interesting because I've been saying this for some time. I've got to be careful. A bunch of HR people are about to punch their speakers of whatever service they're listening to this on. I really believe that we've potentially got organisational design back to front for a while. So people will write job descriptions and then they'll assess candidates against that job description. They'll employ the candidate that potentially has the best match. Sometimes not, but let's say potentially has the best match. And then goes, right, that's your job. But they might have only been a 70% match or an 80% match or a 90% match. And they may not be the best person to do all of these things. And by the way, they've got a bunch of other skills in their kit bag that you didn't even ask them about. So here someone turns up as their amazing self with their superpowers and everything that they're good at, and you pigeonhole them and say, no, this is your job description. Get in your swim lane. Don't go outside that swim lane. I need you to do this. And they're doing things that they're obviously going to be okay at because they wouldn't have got the job if they didn't. But you're not giving them the environment where they can bring everything to the table. So I've had a view for a while that of course you need to start organisational design by a picture of what are the things that we need. What is the patchwork quilt of skill sets that we need in this organisation to make this work. But don't go out there with strict job descriptions and say, this is your job and don't step outside this job. Go out there and search for the talent. Search for the talent that believe in the vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then sit down and ask them what they're good at, what they like doing. Find out all kinds of things. Oh, you speak Farsi. I had no idea you spoke Farsi. We could use that skill. And no one asked the question because it wasn't in the job description. So ask those questions and find out what all of the talents are in the team. And you're going to end up with some overlaps. You might still end up with some gaps where the team have to grow and cover those gaps. But now you're using the full power of the people that you've employed. instead of pigeonholing them towards a job description. So that's where I think holacracy can come in and start making that environment. What I think it still needs is a conductor. And this is where leadership, maybe not management, I'll be careful there. There's a time and a place for management, but this is where leadership is really important. Now, I'm going to borrow something that I kind of learnt from Otto Scharmer here around theory U and deep listening. And he has this wonderful metaphor in one of his videos where he shows an orchestra playing with Placido Domingo. And individually, you've got these superstars on the stage, wonderful violin players, you've got wonderful tuba players, you've got Placido Domingo, what an amazing talent and an amazing voice. But it doesn't all come together without someone who's able to draw and hold space and go, right. And individually, they've all got their talents. And a solo violin player sounds amazing, but it doesn't sound as good as a string quartet. And a string quartet doesn't sound as good as a mini orchestra. And a mini orchestra doesn't sound as rich as a complete orchestra. And it doesn't sound as rich until Placido Domingo takes the stage and brings what he brings to the table. But without that conductor holding space for people and going, here's your talent, I'm going to bring that in here, I'm going to bring that in here, you still end up with just a bunch of people kind of doing their own thing. So that's a long answer to say that I fully believe in it. If we can use it so that everyone can bring their entire talent to the table, where they can ditch their weaknesses, unless it's something that they really want to improve. Don't worry about those weaknesses. Someone else has got that. And stitch it together and make that patchwork quilt where the total is greater than the sum of the parts. Then we're creating something amazing. But you still need that conductor that's got the vision and holds space for everyone to create that environment where everyone can do what they do. How's that sound?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So the reason why I've been wrestling with holacracy this entire quarter is thinking about some of these very issues. Do we have the right environment to nurture people through their leadership maturity stages? Does holacracy allow for that? I don't think it necessarily does, and it doesn't take into account some of the issues of the earlier stages around power, as you mentioned, as an example, and belonging as another. It does allow for the structure to be movable and fluid and adaptable in terms of bringing the circles together to meet a particular purpose or need in the organization and dissolving when it no longer serves. That's all great. And what it does lack, though, is leadership and mentoring to help people grow and evolve. So it requires a lot of very mature, self-directed people, and not every organization has that. I mean, I just look around everywhere you go. The world is being run by people 20 years younger than us, at least. It's Gen Y and Gen Z coming through who are in charge of the world at the moment. And there's no space for mentoring and age and wisdom in that kind of lack of hierarchy. In any case, I'll be debriefing fully at the end of this season around observations from different guests around holacracy, the strengths, the challenges, etc. Some of the principles that you mention that no doubt are in your book. You're a leader now. So hang on. You're a leader, now what? Now what? So the principles in there you mentioned are targeted at first-time leaders that apply to leaders at all stages because they're fundamentals, and sometimes even if we're seasoned, that we might have missed some of the fundamentals. Where can people find out more about you, Mick, and your work?
Yeah, so if they go to mickspiers.com, that's mickspiers.com, that's where you can pretty much find anything. You can find the book, you can find the Leadership Academy, you can find the podcast, you can find everything that we do at mickspiers.com. I'm also quite prolific on LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn to be an amazing environment to connect with people and share ideas. So if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn and have a wonderful conversation and see how we can help each other, I'm also always up for that. On mickspiers.com, there's also a bunch of resources that people can download as well, like my self-reflection journal. I've practiced self-reflection now for 14 years, Zoe. So I've created a self-reflection journal to help people to get into that practice of asking themselves the questions every day. You know, what went well today? What didn't go well today? What would I do differently next time if I had my time over again? what did I learn about myself today and what did I learn about others. So my self-reflection journal really helps people go through that. But yeah, the number one resource would be mickspiers.com.
Fantastic. Mick, this has been such a delight. I think I've found a fellow human leadership development thinker that I resonate with, and I've really enjoyed our conversation and the deep insight and wisdom that you bring to the table. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Zoe. It's been a great pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
Wasn't that fun? I really enjoyed that conversation. I love leadership conversations where we get underneath the hood and look at the systemic challenges that leaders are facing in their leadership and come up maybe with some questions and some solutions to that. So hopefully you got lots out of the way that we spoke about and interrogated some of these challenges. And I love how that an award-winning program comes back to a long-standing learning methodology, experiential learning, which is what my whole background is based on. The learn, do, or the plan, do, review cycle. And as he calls it, learn lab, practical lab, and reflection lab as a way of making use of the things that you learn and putting into practice and learning from those experiments. Micro-learning is probably the breakthrough concept for me out of our conversation as somebody who does deliver leadership programs. How important it is to break it down into these atomic-like digestible bites so that people really can just play with one thing, implement it, and get a result from it. I think that's pretty powerful. So I super enjoyed that conversation with Mick. I urge you to check out his book, You're a Leader, Now What? And follow along at his blog. I've had a read through some of his articles. They're pretty good at mickspiers.com. So this episode, if you liked it, please share, please tell other people about it, re-listen to it, do a song and dance, write a comment on LinkedIn, wherever you like. That kind of interaction is great. It makes this more of a conversation, and I really do appreciate hearing from listeners. After nearly 6 years of doing the show, it's always a thrill, literally, genuinely, when I hear from listeners about what's important to them and what they got out of listening. This episode is brought to you by my leadership development program called Amplifiers. And the big news in Amplifiers is that we've just had a rejig. We're moving into our 4th year running Amplifiers, and it's always important to shake up how you do things to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of the leaders that we aim to assist. It is focused on advanced leadership thinking. And what we've done in rejigging the program is that we've developed into a staged development. So there's a first year, second year, and a third year. You don't have to sign up for all 3 years at once. The first year is really about learning the fundamentals of advanced leadership. Leading change, leading strategy, leading performance, and leading culture. And it's in bite-sized chunks. Yay, thank you, lesson from Mick. With group coaching so that you get that sort of social learning aspect where you can use your peers as a sounding board. And a nice cadence of activity so that you can learn a little tiny bit, apply it, learn from that lesson, and keep implementing your skills. So that runs for a year. That's called leadership training, Amplifiers leadership training. The second year is called expedition, where it really is applying things on the job in a deeper way. And it's a faster, easier, digestible pace. And you have all the inclusions from the first year. And the third year is called Horizons, Amplifiers Horizons. And this is really about bringing your team into play. And it's all the inclusions from the first 2 years and a specific focus on developing your team. So that's the pathway we've developed for Amplifiers. If you're keen to know more, hop onto our website, zoerouth.com, click on programs, click on Amplifiers, and there's some information for you there. Or you can email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. I would love to hear from you. I would love to work with you. I would love to help you be the best leader you can be, because with better leaders, we have a better world. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.